Hi, everybody. Welcome to Stage X. Thanks, Zach. Yeah, and we're going to have a fun panel here with a couple of battled, hardened souls. So, yeah, so what Zach said, this is about the clash between Web 2, Web 2.5, Web 3, Web 5, and can we get it right this time?
Web 5, represent.
Represent. My name is Ben Schiller. I'm the opinion editor at CoinDesk. So the question we're asking today is really whether Web3 needs Web2 in order to fulfill its promises. And we're represented here by Rich Widmann from Google Cloud. He's obviously from big tech. So you know, Web3 is obviously promised to liberate us from all kinds of gatekeepers, whether that's central banks or governments or big tech itself, handing back autonomy to users to control their own data, their own assets, their own personal lives. And but Web3 is also sometimes criticized for living in its own kind of bubble, its own silo. And there's a question about, like, how do we make this technology, which is a good idea, but how do we make it more approachable, more mainstream, and more something that everyday people can use? So let's get into it. So Rich, let's start with you. I know we just had a session about this Ethereum node product already, but talk about how that kind of fits into the kind of wider Web3 strategy you have at Google.
Yeah, so I think there's a saying that the future's here, it's just not evenly or equitably distributed. And so part of that node engine that we're building, part of the announcement that James just made with Polygon is really being an active force to make sure that that distribution occurs on our watch, right? One of the things that we do really well at Google is build systems at scale, right, at planetary scale, such that the things like YouTube and Google Search, et cetera, aren't just reserved for, you know, the elites or folks that are just living in North America, but actually are distributed globally. And so I think that's actually, to your question, right, about does Web3 need Web2? I think that question, you know, kind of, it speaks for itself, right? The last 2 to 3 years of what we've seen in the space, I think the answer is yes. It doesn't need everything from Web 2, though, right? I think the things that it does need are the things that we're looking to provide with our products and services, which is global distribution, global scale, the type of resiliency that you would expect to have to the extent that you're going to put your entire financial system on these protocols. You can't have the kinds of things that we've seen over the last couple of years. And so our job, through our products and services, is to equip developers to solve those problems.
So Ethan Buchman, you have rather a different vision of the future of the internet. So what do you make of Rich's contention here that we need Web 2 to scale Web 3?
So Rich, you said that the future is here, is just not evenly distributed. And you believe that Google is going to help evenly distribute it, or Google is the reason it's not evenly distributed?
Help.
Google will help. Okay. Yeah, so I believe Google and companies like Google are the reason it's not evenly distributed. And the corporate structure of companies like Google and many Web 2 companies actually cements the kind of inequality that Web 3, I don't love the Web 3 term, but you know, we'll stick with it here, is pushing back against. And so, you know, does Web 3 need Web 2? Maybe, just because, you know, as a matter of practice, like the Web 2 giants kind of control the internet, and that's the problem Web 3 was designed to hit back against. So we need them insofar as they're the incumbents that we're, you know, disintermediating, and they need to kind of come around. But really, it should be, well, you know, does Web 2 need Web 3 to stay relevant? And it seems they kind of do.
Well, I think that the numbers just disagree with you, right? I mean, if you talk about distribution of products, there's only a couple companies that have brought the internet to, you know, 6-7 billion people on the planet, and that's you know, that's a driving force. And a lot of that was something that we did we took on that cost, we took on that burden for folks, and I think that's the goal here. I mean, the other thing I'll say is, you know, Web3 and the community that is around it, and we interact with these folks all the time. It's one of the reasons why I got involved, is really about building consensus, right? It's building consensus through fair governance, right, where everyone has, you know, an equal say and ability to participate to the extent that they want to. And I think by challenging the governance structures of corporations that have enabled technology to go global, you're really trying to rewrite like 400 years of corporate history, right? You're going back to the East India Company, like. Yeah. So, but you're disagreeing with the millions of people who have built millions of products that have put us on the stage with these microphones with all these people here. I mean, look, you could take that challenge up. It's just I don't think you want to.
I do. I'm trying to rewrite 400 years of history. I mean, I keep talking about the 16th century. If you heard me last night, I was going on and on about the 16th century because it was at the end of the 16th century that everything went wrong. We started to get these shareholder-based corporations to structure our entire society around, and it's 400 years later. We're on a hardcore, unsustainable path. We kiboshed the possibility of worker cooperatives and actually empowering labor. Google has a long history of labor abuses or anti sort of labor practices, and Web3 is really about re-empowering the larger group of stakeholders and moving away from a sort of pure shareholder-based capitalism towards a more diverse and inclusive kind of ownership model. And frankly, I think we've made a joke of ourselves as Web3 people. Like we're not, we've got our own problems, and we've been infiltrated by capital and all this sort of stuff. So I don't like to be too associated with too much of what's going on in Web3. That's part of why I don't like the term also. But I think the core values are still there, and I have never seen those core values actually expressed by Google or large tech companies, other than to sell their next product.
The moderator has a very easy job right now. You guys can tell. This is probably the easiest money you've ever
Sorry,
heard.
Ben.
Well, maybe let me just jump in there. I mean, Rich claims to be doing Web3. What aspects of what he's doing isn't Web3 in your opinion, Ethan?
I mean, he's running nodes. I think it's great that he's running nodes, but he's running nodes on Google infrastructure. And frankly, I think one of the biggest problems, I mean, let me put it like this, like so much of internet traffic routes through California because that's where all the infrastructure is. Imagine all of your sewage had to route through California. Right? Like the internet is a public good. It should remain fundamentally local. There should be more local infrastructure, more municipal and city-oriented and regionally oriented infrastructure. And of course, there are CDNs, and everyone's using CDNs, but the ownership model is still all through California. The idea of routing your sewage through California is a bit of a joke, just to get you thinking about like, okay, obviously Austin's not going to route its sewage. I mean, it'll send its homeless people to California, but it's not going to route its sewage through there. But we route all of our internet traffic there because that's where the ownership is. And so, saying we're doing Web3 because we're offering nodes on Google Compute, like it's great. It's great to have more offerings for nodes. I mean, unfortunately, Web3 engineers haven't paid enough attention to like making the software run really smoothly and easily for operators, and that's probably something Google's really good at. So kudos and thanks for that. But running nodes on Google infrastructure is like not the future. I'm sorry.
So I'll just sort of say one thing, which is there are protocols today that have billions of dollars of total value locked, where there are no nodes deployed in certain parts of the world. We actually run nodes, some of the only nodes that exist in places like Latin America. And so I think that, frankly, when you're talking about sort of this model of sewage and plumbing, when we built the internet, right, when we laid the undersea cables in the data centers that supported things like YouTube, et cetera, we built it with this idea of global distribution. I don't see anyone else really making that capital investment. And by the way, our products are unopinionated. So if you want to deploy an Ethereum node because you're JP Morgan and you want to go and trade assets or do repo on chain, knock your socks off. But if you're a Web3 developer and you want to take up this, this mantle of redefining governance and redefining financial systems, that's also something that we support.
Rich, can the U.S. government shut down your nodes in Latin America?
No.
Are you sure?
Well, here's what I'll say. If you think about the nuanced conversation that people have, or think about data residency, is the Cosmos protocol and any of the protocol chains subject to the GDPR? You're going to give me the same answer, right? So this is where I think, let's ask this question. In your mind, who's doing it right? Which protocol out there, and if you say the Cosmos protocol, like then we all know the answer to this. We can just wrap up this panel. But like, who's actually doing it right?
It's a hard question. It's really hard to do right. I mean, I'm something of an idealist, but I like to stay practical. I think there are, I think Bitcoin and Ethereum are doing a lot right. And I think they've done a really good job of preserving certain core values in the infrastructure. I think obviously Cosmos has a very unique perspective because Cosmos prioritizes the idea of sovereignty and interoperability so that any community can run their own their own chain, or what we call a community computer. For us, this is like the community computer revolution. Like there were personal computers, now there's community computers. Any community can have their own computer, and it's up to them to run it how they see fit on whatever infrastructure they see fit. And if they want to use Google Cloud because it makes it easy, then actually, I'm grateful to Google for making it easy for a community to run their computer on the cloud. But to me, that's like Alexander the Great showing up, in like a little town and saying like, hey guys, like you can use my infrastructure, just like pay me taxes and fight in my war, but like otherwise I'll protect you and take care of you. And like for some, that's a worthy trade-off. But for others, they want freedom, they want sovereignty, they want to take responsibility for themselves.
So who's doing it right?
Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Cosmos. Duh.
Well, just to kind of follow up on that question, so it's about like scaling to the next billion users, and crypto is often criticized for being siloed and kind of a bit techy and hard to use. I mean, how do we get that usership going? I mean, if it's not through something like Google Cloud, how do we do that?
But the question is, what are we scaling to the next billion users? And Google Cloud is offering nodes, which is great. Are we talking about building an application that is going to actually help real world people, or what are we really talking about scaling? I mean, my focus is trying to figure out how to use cryptocurrency systems to actually improve the cash flow, liquidity, and clearing capacity of real world businesses, right? There's like massive liquidity crises all around us. I mean, First Republic is like failing as we speak. These are major American banks that are just going under because the financial system is just the plumbing is just so broken, and the central banks, have no idea what they're doing. Cryptocurrencies were allegedly supposed to be some kind of solution for this, but they're obviously also incomplete. Most businesses are not using them or not even considering using them. And we're trying to think about, okay, how can we actually build payment rails and systems that businesses can actually use that they can improve their liquidity profile and positioning. And that's a very different framing from most of the rest of Web3, which is just obsessed with store of value and settlement and finality and these sorts of things. So we think there are ways to build real-world applications, but they're going to be much less speculative. They might not have a coin that's whose price is going to go to the moon or whatever, which makes it harder to finance them in this sort of culture. And so we're all a little bit stuck. And so maybe having Google sort of saying, hey, we're here to not be evil or to not be Web 2 evil.
They don't say that anymore.
They don't say that anymore, right? Yeah, right. Sorry, I forgot. I was hoping to get Rich to say we don't say that anymore, but you front ran him. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, I think, that is the question that developers need to answer, right? And I think our view is, frankly, that the more people who are able to participate in coming to that solution, in other words, the more people who are asking themselves, what do we need to build? What applications do we need to scale to solve the liquidity problems you're talking about, to solve technology distributions you're talking about? I mean, honestly, it goes back to just even human coordination, right? Governance, right? And what we saw, and one of the things that really spurred our activity in the space, was that the people having that conversation was really no different than the small boiler rooms that people claim that a lot of the current systems that we have today have, which is they're not inclusive enough. There are not enough people who have a seat at the table. And so when that problem is not just a knowledge problem, but it's a technology problem, it's incumbent upon the people who have the ability to help in that circumstance, like kind of create that. So to the question that was asked earlier about like, well, what are the things we're trying to scale? I think no one really knows the answer of what it will look like in 5 to 10 years, but we all know that something's not working, and that by adding more people into that conversation as opposed to walling them out, and if it's not just because of where they live, it's what skills they have, then we're never going to get to the right answer. And so that I think is a really big part of what we're trying to do here is like, I mean, I got involved in Web3 as an attorney. I was a securities lawyer.
I'm sorry to hear that.
And the thing is like, I've seen this evolution where when I would first talk to people about the importance of understanding the US financial system and capital markets and the policies that underpin that, and the reason why the future viability of their business depended on that understanding, not just viewing it as hostile. At first they looked at me like I was crazy, and now I think everyone here in the audience, probably you guys as well, every conversation is actually circling around this issue. And so I think the same thing is happening with infrastructure now. When you talk to people about the importance of running nodes and the availability of data and resiliency, running technology that's sustainable, right? Moving from proof of work to proof of stake for a lot of these protocols. 5, 6 years ago, we didn't have the brain space for it. We didn't want to bother with it. We were too busy launching tokens. And now, it's coming to fruition that people are focusing on these things. So I think that the trend is happening in the same way. I've seen it before in other ways. And the goal is that we don't get to the point where we're at on the former issue, which is policy, when it comes to technology. In other words, we're not waiting until someone's knocking on the door saying this whole thing is going to fall over before we start to provide tools and systems that actually can scale globally. So I think that's frankly why we're here. And so instead of viewing it as hostile, or actually even, we're not even saying that we have all the answers. I think the idea is help people like you get to the answer, right? Help the Cosmos developers get to the right answer.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you're hostile or the Web3 group at Google is hostile, but Google itself is obviously hostile. I hope we can agree on that.
I have a hard time with that, right? Like, I think the same thing, if people were to say in anywhere else that the Web3 community is full of a bunch of degen crypto people, I think you'd say, like, well, that's not entirely true,
it's
right?
Mostly true. I can admit it. Can you admit it?
I think you would, if you look at the audience here today.
We're a bunch of degenerates. Is Google evil?
I mean, look, it's funny to joke about.
One of us is honest.
But I think if you look at the people, frankly, who are here, it's not just people who are degen coders or people who are like. I mean, it really, and honestly,
It's
it should
the future
be.
of France.
It's the future of France. Not even meme lords too, right? We can have some of those, but I think that kind of diversity in terms of where people are coming from, what their perspective is, like increasing that 10 is important. And so if somebody were to label all of Web3 as X, I think it's the same logical fallacy as saying all of Google is Y. It's complicated, it's nuanced, and I think some of us here feel really strongly about this. Some of us here probably are like, I'm just trying to get my money back, and I'm looking for that developer who launched that smart contract that got sank, and some of us are here trying to build the future of France.
Just a second, Ethan. So we want to get the audience involved here because this isn't just a debate for these gentlemen here. So please open your phones, go to the Consensus app, go to the schedule, and then to the session, and you'll see a poll there. And the poll that we're asking is, Web3 is, and then you have three options. One, our internet future owned by users, which is this gentleman here. A new architecture controlled by corporate titans, which I guess is Rich here. Or three, just a buzzword, which is like Web3, what is it really?
Is there an all of the above option?
I don't think there's just three options. So please go to your app and participate, and
You should add an option there.
Is it up on the screen?
I think
Okay,
it's all of
here
the
we go.
above.
And then we'll announce the results at the end of the session. So, Ethan, where do we go from here?
Rich, do you believe in decentralization?
It's a loaded question, but yes, I believe that. I believe that distributed authority and power fairly, based on a mutual understanding of rules and principles, is something that we should all be striving for in systems of governance.
That sounds great. Can we break up Alphabet?
Under what terms?
Just spin out all the different pieces as independent little companies instead of all being under a conglomerate.
To what end?
To reduce the power dynamics and hopefully the human rights abuses and create a bit more decentralization.
Would you ask the same question of the folks who are running any of the protocols today that exist on the Cosmos network? In other words, do you think that those protocols are more or less decentralized than the corporations that you're critical of?
I think some of them are more decentralized, probably, or more centralized, to be honest. But I don't think they have the same power or impact. If they did, I'd be pretty critical of them.
Yeah, I think so. A couple things. One, I think the questions that you ask are oftentimes just kind of trying to drive everything down to the most extreme answer.
I'm just trying to be entertaining.
Yeah, well, that too.
I hope it's working.
But practically speaking, what we should be doing is what we think is best for consumers and society, right? Based on a shared belief of what we ought to be striving for.
Well, that's my problem right there. I don't believe in consumers.
Okay.
I mean, when you frame individuals as consumers, you inherently limit their ability to participate in democratic governance. They're not consumers; they're citizens. When you conceptualize every human being as just a consumer, as someone who's just there to consume the product produced by your shareholder-based corporation, so they can report on their quarterly earnings that the sales have gone up, then what kind of participation, what kind of governance are we creating? Right? We need to think about people as citizens. These are participatory human beings. They can think for themselves. They can evaluate which of us is right and honest and what do they want in the world. It's not just about consumers, and that I appreciate having the opportunity to call out that language. I'm sure you didn't mean it like that, but I jumped on it because I think it actually gets right to the point, which is that so much is conceptualized as just, oh, we're put on this planet just to consume what's produced for us by big corporations, and that's exactly the model that needs to change. And this idea that like, oh, it's good for the consumer because the price is low, I mean, that could just lead to the complete destruction of the actual fabric of society and to, Jeff Bezos just being in charge and arguing with you guys.
Look, if you want to question the social contract of the free market and the ability to interact with based on, buying and selling, offering goods and services, like you take that up. I don't think that's a winning battle. I think that and the other thing is, when we're talking about consumers, when people use the word consumers, like I don't want to purport to add intent to that, but frankly, there's nothing about the relationships that a lot of companies have today that are looking to participate in Web3 that looks all that much different than what you're seeing with traditional companies.
Yeah,
I mean,
most of Web3 is bad as well.
Okay. I think what
you got a tough adversary here.
Well, what I would say is like I want to have, and we'll always have these discussions. I mean, like one of the things I don't hear people saying is like, what does it look like to get it right? Like it's super easy to just like start throwing darts. I mean, and we see this in the ecosystem all the time. People are like, hey, we hate this protocol, and you guys should hate them too. And it's like, all right, well, what does it look like to get it right?
Yeah.
And like until somebody comes to me with an answer, then I'm happy to think about more critically the ways that we could organize corporate governance in a way.
I have answers.
I want then deploy them.
Yeah, I am. I mean, so Informal Systems is organized as a workers' cooperative because that's what we believe the right way to run a company is, to give the workers actual democratic control over the company. It doesn't mean they vote. We're 55 people. It doesn't mean you vote on every single decision. But at the end of the day, as the CEO, I'm accountable to the employees, right? That completely changes the culture of the organization, and I would love to see more companies, especially in the Web3 space, actually walk the talk, right? I have one vote in the company. I founded this company. So did Ariane over there. She also has one vote, and so does Phil, who joined, I don't know, sometime last year as an employee. He also has one vote, right? So worker cooperatives, I think, are fundamental to actually organizing things correctly, and it pains me to see so many Web3 companies talking a big game about the future and still organizing as traditional Delaware C Corp shareholder-based, with large VCs on the cap table like that. So I think worker cooperatives are key. I think the other key is empowering municipalities and municipal infrastructure. And they take care of the sewage and they take care of electricity and all these basic utilities. Internet should be part of the package of services offered by municipalities, and it should be considered a public utility. And Google can offer services on top and stuff, but we need to further democratize the actual core infrastructure. And it's expensive, and that's part of the problem. And we're grateful to Google for laying cables and all that sort of stuff because we wouldn't have the communication without it. But that's the kind of thing we need to push towards. Actual cooperative ownership and actually empowered municipalities, and that might actually start to change things in structure. I'm not arguing against markets per se. I'm arguing against large-scale, multinational, unaccountable, shareholder-based capitalism.
I mean, any form of governance is just an attempt to solve a collective action problem. That's literally all it is.
It's just that.
And so I think like a lot of the things that you're talking about, a lot of the things that you're trying to achieve is solving those collective action problems. I think people could disagree or choose different governance systems that work well for them given the circumstances. But ultimately, in order to solve a collective action problem, you can't do it by boxing out some part of the ecosystem because you're kind of frame them as one heuristic or another. And that's a big part of why we decided to participate in this space. Is there was a lot more of like not you, us, and not them, these guys over here. And frankly, that's just not how we're going to get to a place where I think Ethan's future even exists, right? Where you have everyone participating, maybe more worker cooperatives, maybe more decentralized systems of governance that we can all agree and have common trust in. But
I'd love to see Google do that. Google should become a worker co-op. You would have more rights than you do now.
We're happy to help on the technology side.
Great. Well, I think we could talk for hours about this, and but we're out of time now. We're just going to get to the results of the poll. Thanks very much for participating. So more than half of the audience here, or more than half of the people who participated, said that it should be our internet future owned by users. That's Web3. That's 57%. Then we have 32% roughly that said this Web3 is just a buzzword, which is a fair comment, I think. And then we have about 10% or 11% saying it should be a new architecture controlled by corporate titans. Thank you very much, Ethan. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you.